Ladies and gents, welcome to Rex, and this is 40k, the Emperor Reborn, the Star Child. Warhammer 40k, lore slash speculationment. Okay, so this is not really a lore, but this is what he's assuming. I don't think I've seen any Lutin video like that, but yeah, I guess. Lutin knows a really well lore of 40k. So I guess his speculation might not be that far off. I don't know. It's always going to be fun. So I guess this is going to be about Emperor coming back or something. Because as far as I can remember, all the videos I've seen, that the newer updates are kind of hinting at that, right? Emperor is coming back, so Gilliman came back. Emperor is kind of becoming more and more, I don't know, involved in a way. So I guess that they're not going the trend where Emperor is just dying off, or Emperor is just a means to an end, where all his job is just to keep the portals open or whatever. No, he's actually having more and more input into things. Imagine that Emperor is back. I feel like if they do that, that's kind of like a strong thing, because Primarchs obviously all are dead, but if you bring back Primarchs one after another like Gilliman, if you bring more and more stronger Primarchs with Imperium, that would make them really heavyweight. They're already somewhat big and powerful, but just unorganized, so they're screwing things up. But if slowly Primarchs come back, they become even more powerful. So that already gives them a really heavy edge compared to everybody else, every other Xenos races. But if the Emperor comes back, isn't that like a bit too much? Like, holy shit, Emperor's back, he's going to reform everything. Like, it kind of makes like, okay, if with the Emperor return, full-fledged Emperor return, and with the Imperium that is on the state, wouldn't that automatically mean they're going to be a dominant force very soon? I don't know. I feel like if Emperor comes back, he won't come back full-fledged like he was before. He will have more function, more, more sentient than he is right now. I don't know. He'll be more involved, I guess, point blank, rather than people just assuming. Is the Emperor doing something or not? Emperor just whisper to certain people, right? Otherwise, nobody actually knows. They just, worship him. That's it. But yeah, this is a really fun topic. I loved the video. I think it was Lutin's video, right? Who talked about the origin, where Emperor comes from. I loved that fucking video. I guess that was the original video about Emperor of Mankind or whatever the series was, which was so awesome. Like all the scenarios where he could have come from. So this is going to be something similar like that. It's going to be fun. Let's do it. Look at the music. Shit.
Now, through one thing and another, I find myself back talking about the Emperor. But in fairness, I think this is a good one, not least because soon we may have some clarity that will warrant a follow-up. Now, for those of you who have thought for the longest time that I were in fact a traitor, a heretic, a cursed spreader of anti-Imperium propaganda who sought to turn believers into the condemned, twist you into followers of the Dark Gods, believers in the primordial truth, you're not 100% wrong, but at the same time, to keep those irritating inquisitors off my back, I'm here to tell you any previous heretical discussion was of course a test, simply a test. Because
alright, seriously, but I know people say that jokingly and everything, but imagine if people get serious. I mean, if lore becomes so big, that people become so vast, they actually create conspiracies about the lore. Like how they do about governments and shit. We hear about conspiracy theories about US government, this and that, about left wing, right wing. Imagine if people actually start doing that about the lore. Oh, look at that. He's just a chaos driven guy. He just says shit about Emperor because he was like, they just pick and choose what information they like about the lore. That would be so ridiculous.
Because today I wanted to continue on with some speculations about the Emperor. Because with the soon to be released final novels in the Siege of Terror series, I hope it may bring to us some clarity. With that said, I don't hold any delusion that this is going to wrap up everything neatly, because that's simply not how 40k works, but I do hope it could help put to rest a couple of questions that have been hanging over with the complex tapestry of the older and newer lore descriptions around this time. Now, just to note from the outset, the concept of the Star Child is a contentious one, because of its origins way back in the early lore of 40k, so much so that it's often just dismissed out of hand as a stupid concept, or even that R word. However, I am here to tell you that if you're not aware of it, this line of thinking is firmly back on the table. It has been re-established in one of the newest books documenting the Imperium in M41, and thus it is worthy of discussion, in fact several books. It certainly can no longer be dismissed as old stupid lore that is irrelevant. So I will take the opportunity once again to remind that just because old lore has not been mentioned for some time does not mean it has been passively retconned. Because firstly, it's long established that in 40k even the most cursory of side notes can develop into full-blown lore events, and second because retcon is not a thing in 40k. And please do at me about that in the comments so that I can ignore them. And please do go and see my video where I speak about it specifically, it's linked below. The final battle of the Emperor and Horus.
So retcons don't happen in 40k, is that it? I mean, that would be like, holy shit, how big the lore is. It's surprising that it doesn't happen. You need some very good story keeping in order to pull that off. Because whenever a lore gets big enough, there will always be something conflicting in there.
Has long been the foundation of 40k. It's one of the most embedded events for the verse, and it's something people learn very early on. At face value, it's very straightforward. The end of the heresy, the Emperor teleports to Horus's ship and they fight a brutal battle to the death, resulting in Horus being completely eradicated from existence and the Emperor mortally wounded and then interred on the Golden Throne, where he remains for some 10,000 years to the current period in M41. These events though, when viewed through a wider lens, leave us with interesting questions, such as if the Emperor did know how the situation would turn out and willingly faced Horus, knowing he would be unable to win, what does that say about him, his intentions and his state of mind? What were the specifics of the battle? Did a Terminator, Custodes or Ol-P interrupt Horus and enable the Emperor to reach a state of mind such that he could obliterate Horus? Was the Emperor holding back while fighting Horus at all? Was Horus's fate actually predetermined by the Chaos Gods and he was merely a pawn? How was the Emperor able to overcome Horus, who we presume to have been empowered by all those Chaos Gods at the time, acting as their avatar in the Materium? Those two things line up. If they pulled away and reduced their power to allow the Emperor a brief window of opportunity, why would they do that? Was this a clever play by one of the Chaos Gods to weaken the others in the Great Game? Or was it that they understood collectively that Chaos would be more powerful in the long term should Horus fall right there? Which brings us to the issue of things such as the Cabal. It's such a brief...
We are approaching... I mean, look, what is God, right? I mean, what is the version of God? There are many versions of God. God could be anything from a creator who has certain power to all-knowing God who knows everything, control everything, who is everything. So I guess it just depends on how powerful Chaos Gods are and how much control they have. Are they all-knowing God who knows things, who can predict things? If that's the case, and Chaos Gods actually allowed all this to happen, allowed Emperor to live, I mean, it kind of makes sense because Chaos Gods are embodiment of all these different things. Like war is Khorne, right? So Khorne needs war. Slaanesh needs debauchery, things like that. There needs to be disease and pestilence for Nurgle because that's embodiment of all that. So maybe they need to keep the Imperium going. Because if Emperor dies, Imperium is done, the warp is done for them. So I guess a big entity with lots of souls gets cut off and not part of the game anymore. So that could be it. But I don't think Chaos Gods are, that level of all-knowing. I don't know.
Moment in the entire history of 40k in the Imperium, but the details we can discover and learn from this could grant us a lot of perspective, albeit I must admit probably quite speculative still. Last thing I want to note in this intro, I don't really want to drill down too heavily on the Cabal today. It's a pretty broad and fragmented topic, and for all its details it can be summed up relatively neatly. Plus, not gonna lie, I didn't want to cross-ref it all, plus we've got other things to look at. Because in honesty, the main question is, did the Emperor willingly walk into his own state of perpetual death, both knowingly and willingly? And if so, why? And why that is the main question for today will become clear. To the many billions of Imperial citizens, it is of course self-evident that the Emperor of Mankind is the true god of humanity, the saviour of all, the protector, the golden light that will lead us all into the new golden age for humanity, rebuilding the vast galactic empire, exterminating the Xenos threats, purging the traitors, and most importantly consigning the foul and abhorrent entities of the warp, including the so-called Chaos Gods, to permanent and eternal oblivion. How much any of that is true is entirely unknown. We do know that within the Inquisition there are many schools of thought on what the Emperor is and what he is doing. Now I've looked at these in several previous videos, so I won't list through them all here today, but it's also linked at the end. Within the context of what we're thinking about here, we should at least recall that some inquisitorial ideologies consider that everything the Emperor has chosen to do, up to and including the end of the heresy and the time since, were all known to him. That is to say that he knew exactly what was coming and how it would play out in the aftermath.
That's strong.
That everything is unfolding as it should and is all part of his supreme grand plan for humanity. These are the Puritan Inquisitors known as the Amalathians. This perspective gives them significant power because by following this line of thinking, it means that anything they may choose to do is also part of the Emperor's ultimate plan. Now some may view that
is a dangerous tool, right? Emperor knew everything, Emperor knows everything, Emperor knew what was going to happen, so Emperor knows what we are doing right now, Emperor knows that we are documenting everything, and Emperor knows what we're going to do. So it's by the blessing of Emperor. That is extreme slippery slope, isn't it? I mean, I don't believe that was the case with Emperor because a lot of things would have been better, right? A lot of things that went sideways wouldn't have happened, right? Because why would Emperor want all of that shit happen? It feels chaotic how all the heresy played out. I mean, I don't know, it could be reason behind it, but I don't think it is. But obviously this Imperium believing Emperor is a god and there is an actual version of them actually believing that he knew everything, it's not that far-fetched.
Cynically than others, some may practice it in the most complete and sincere definitions, while others simply abuse it to rationalize and enable their horrific personal desires. But this is nothing unusual, absolute power corrupts absolutely, and so forth. Inquisitors as a faction, despite their differing views at a fundamental level, all believe they're doing the Emperor's work. But in the case of the Amalathians, it's more that they would see themselves acting with true moral impunity, because in one respect they may consider that their decisions are predetermined, and that's where I could spin this off into linking it with the whole theories of time from Dark Origins, but maybe not today. Then we have this other interesting and relevant perspective of the so-called Illuminati and the Sensei. This is the whole Star Child theory. Now, these are not members of the Inquisition, these are something else entirely, and I should note that it has been barely mentioned since the 3rd edition, and existed within books that are generally frowned upon, like the Inquisition War trilogy, for example. That's a whole other kettle of fish. But so many for the longest time considered any mention of this Star Child theory to be fanciful nonsense. Old lore that was muddled by the mists of time, and since its early beginnings was barely acknowledged at all. Until now. In both the Dark Imperium and Throne of Light series, which have been documenting the most recent events for the Imperium and Guilliman's Indomitus Crusade, which includes the Psychic Awakening, which saw a massive increase in the birth of human psychers across the Imperium. This has meant a lot more work for the Sisters of Silence and also more fuel for the Emperor. But essentially, as a result of the Psychic Awakening, the legend of the Star Child has been reignited. More specifically, it breaks down like this. A few years into the Indomitus Crusade, visions of a golden infant interspersed with flashes of a radiant being rising from a throne of light began to be reported across astropathic relay networks, spreading out from the segmentum solar. Over time the images became clearer, and many began to interpret this with the legend of the Star Child. As is the case with different ideologies of the Inquisition, this concept is deeply problematic for many. And while some seek to enable it to come into being, others fear what it could mean and so seek to prevent it. others such as the Servants of Chaos are actively hostile to the possibility of the Emperor being reborn for obvious reasons. And this is where it gets a lot confusing and very convoluted. This Illuminati, or whatever name they wish to operate under, in Throne of Light they're simply called the Cult of the Star Child. These religious cults await the birth of the so-called Star Child, that's the second coming of the new man, the Emperor, to who they refer to as the Sensei Emperor. The Sensei are the immortal, true sons of the Emperor, sired by him during his earlier life amongst humanity. His real sons, essentially. They're said to of course hold very powerful gifts, some psychic, some null, some just masterful swordsmen. And as I said, this is very old lore, but one mention in the 3rd edition, which I should note was a pretty good edition for fleshing out lore, especially its rulebook, describes how in 997M41, Inquisitor Fortes reported to have discovered a cult known as the Cult of the Star Child, led by a self-proclaimed sensei claiming to be the Emperor's sons.
Star Child would make sense why Emperor would die in a way he died. Why he would go through this chaotic motion if you already knew it. Maybe Emperor realized that he needs to be even more powerful, godlike basically. So he went through this Horus Heresy process just so the Chaos Gods would back off. He dies and in a way becomes more psychically powerful, right? Becomes more stronger with the warp, godlike basically, just so he can be reborn as an even powerful entity. But this time he's not just a flesh and bone, he's just as part of warp as he's part of this new Star Child or whatever, as an even more powerful entity than he was before in order to dominate the world that he was trying to do. Or ultimate goal, basically facing Chaos Gods or something, because he eventually realized that these are going to be the real hurdles if I want to do anything, I guess. I don't know.
Inquisitor rejected this due to their affiliation with Abhumans and the Eldari, and instead suspected that they may be some kind of Tzeentchian cult. They were purged with all but a few of those sensei killed. Now, the cult who are focused on enabling the return of the new man can go by whatever name they want to, but their existence is a lot more vague and in doubt than anything else, especially in the modern Imperium. It's possible they even had connections with members of the Inquisition, which makes some sense because they have beliefs that could align with some inquisitorial ideologies. But this Illuminati are supposed to be called as such because they are said to have been illuminated through having experienced a pretty traumatic event, that is, a demonic possession. They're said to have emerged from it through salvation, and this is the price of membership into their group, to be possessed by a demon, and in doing what seems the impossible, exorcising the demon from their body through sheer willpower alone. It's rare, if ever, for a demon host individual to survive possession, but somehow the members of this cult are said to have achieved this, though undoubtedly this would not be authorized or approved by any within the more Puritan elements of the Inquisition. So in being illuminated to the terror, the horror of chaos, they believe themselves to have gained a new level of understanding of chaos, which is likely fairly reasonable to agree with. Plus they consider themselves subsequently immune to its temptations and corruption. They become untouchable, so as to be able to now fight the darkness in a larger perspective. For whatever.
Or maybe demon never went away completely, but you just reached a state where you think you are immune, but demon is always in you. That's why you're immune to things from now on, because you're already corrupted. You never, got uncorrupted, I guess.
For a reason, they have been said to associate with Eldar Harlequins and to have had access to their Black Library. This is the Eldari's vast library of knowledge secured deep in the webway. It's the collection of their complete cultural knowledge and that of the galaxy, and as such the Illuminati understand the fall of the Eldar and seek to prevent the same from happening to humanity. Their experience and knowledge is said to have emboldened them with an ideological perspective that perhaps only the Emperor himself could equally have shared, and they're supposedly similarly devoted to mankind's preservation, with their ultimate goal being to bring about the rebirth of the Emperor of Man. They realise that the Emperor is disintegrating steadily in both body and mind, and that there will come a time where the Emperor has deteriorated to the point where his will finally breaks. Humanity without the Emperor, of course, means the ultimate oblivion, as we will fall to chaos. And so to prevent this, the Illuminati plan to rejuvenate the Emperor by sacrificing his descendants, the Sensei. At the moment the Emperor finally falls, through yet another act of mass sacrifice, the Emperor can be reborn as this Sensei Emperor, to again lead humanity directly. This cult have been said to be influencing events so as to pave the way for the Emperor's rebirth, gathering together also this sensei, protecting them from the persecution of the Inquisition, such as the Ordo Malleus, who know all about them, considering them to be very obviously dangerous heretics, and are therefore devoted to wiping out the Illuminati and the sensei whenever they come across them. This is just...
I love how they implemented the concept of Illuminati and the group of Illuminati in this kind of a sense. Man, Warhammer is just... I love how they just take things from real world or elements from real world. Myth, lore, whatever, real thing, not real thing. And just fucking implementing this one.
One example of many so-called Inquisition wars which can be ongoing across the Imperium for millennia. And it's also an example of why all the horrors raging across the galaxy, in some respects the Imperium remains in a grumbling, periodically actionable state of cold civil war for the past 10,000 years. And as some have noted, the Imperium and humanity actually spends a lot more time fighting amongst themselves than they do the Xenos, the traitors, the heretics and the powers that would be, despite how often those are presented as the core primary threats. The primary threats to destabilize humanity is actually itself. But most importantly, the Illuminati believe that when the Emperor is reborn, he will wage a final battle against chaos, either through direct war in the warp, or even his rebirth creating some kind of neutralizing effect which will simply rebalance the warp back to a peaceful or mostly calm state. Other theories are said to...
The latter one makes more sense than the first one. First one is just like... knock knock bitches, I'm here. That war would be ridiculous, right? Chaos goes, what the fuck is happening? Oh, look at that, it's the Emperor.
Consider that while the Emperor is dealing with things in the warp, humanity will be left to fight the final ultimate battle across the galaxy to regain control of its borders, with humanity obviously emerging victorious. But all of this remains wildly speculative. The current ecclesiarchy in M41 has begun to preach that the Emperor is stirring, and their belief had some evidence to support it. Miracles have been seen more and more, the ghosts of the loyal faithful dead rising, Imperial saints appearing to aid exhausted armies, readings of the Imperial Emperor's tarot making the difference between disaster and triumph, even reports of the mysterious Legion of the Damned becoming more frequent than was ever seen before. When Guilliman travelled, the warp storms stilled, strangely allowing his armies to make rapid headway. A number of strange coincidences and odd phenomena reached the Primarch's ears. He even witnessed bizarre events himself.
What is Legion of Damned? I've seen those titles in some of the channels, but I don't think I watched it ever. Okay, did Major Kill made a video about that, or did Lutin made? I'm pretty sure I remember notification popping up about that.
That he couldn't account for. Things that he would discount at first, but as time went on, he was unable to do so, and became disquieted. All across the Imperium were people having claimed to have been visited or guided by the Emperor than had ever seen before. Many of these were, of course, burned as heretics, but in other cases their words and presence provided succour to the desperate and encouraged those who had no hope of salvation from other quarters to fight back against mankind's enemies. Most critically, all of these seemingly...
Imagine the Emperor actually reaching out to certain people who has certain traits to them that makes them the best candidate for reaching out, I guess. They just got burned as heretics. Oh, you talk to Emperor? Oh, that's good. Fill out this form and then we'll see how to burn you.
The direct actions by the God Emperor have led to an immense outpouring of faith throughout the galaxy, which has only then further invigorated this cycle of emergence. However, there is one small problem, which is that unfortunately it's been noted that heretical interpretations paralleled a belief in the Star Child promulgated by a cult which had been destroyed some years before the Great Rift opened. So the destruction of those attempting to enable the Star Child is somewhat problematic. It also depends upon if you choose to believe or not if these are the Illuminati that have been destroyed, or merely those who heard stories of the Star Child and formed their own cults. The truth of these matters is really unknown, but it does raise for us this interesting prospect of whether or not the followers of the Star Child concept were actually destroyed or continue to exist somewhere out there in the galaxy.
There's a problem with Illuminati as a concept too, right? When people, if something like Illuminati does exist, It's the idea that's going to be alive. Even if the original group, get disbanded or something, the idea will always be there, and there will always be some version of it. That's the thing with the Star Child. Even if the original cult is destroyed, the idea is strong enough, and if ideas out there will be new cults that form.
In some respects, it could be considered irrelevant. The existence of the sensei is more strange and not something really spoken to. So just how this may or may not play into things is an open question. But the other question can be, are these followers of this Star Child concept necessary at all? Are they really relevant to what's happening, or is it just the Emperor is doing his own thing and they happen to be just following along and they're not really going to influence it whatsoever? I think what's more relevant perhaps is this description stating that a few years into the Indomitus Crusade, visions of this golden infant interspersed with flashes of a radiant being rising from a throne of light began to be reported across the astropathic relay networks, because this really raises the possibility that the Emperor is starting to stir in the warp, not dissimilarly to how the Chaos Gods were originally born. Now, Slaanesh came into being with one massive psychic explosion so powerful it near destroyed the Eldar and tore a hole through the galaxy, but that's not how we believe the other Chaos Gods came into being, for they became sentient, powerful gods through a more calm, steady coalescing in the warp. Coalescing is your word for today. Which is, in honesty, how the Emperor sounds like he is reappearing, if indeed it is the Emperor. This is where we get more into my own speculation, and so likely best to begin a new chapter.
That is such awesome. This is such a great topic. Like, this could spin out in many directions. But yeah, I mean, all the others like Khorne, Nurgle, I mean, they would have slowly materialized as, they came to existence because of other people's how they feel, what the war started to become more and more blood, skulls, bones. So slowly Khorne came into being like that, right? Same thing with the disease and pestilence, things like that. So about the Emperor, I mean, what if it's not the Emperor? Whatever coming into being, what if that's not Emperor? What everybody think is an Emperor, right? So this is, Warhammer has such a promise of the future. If they don't fuck that up, the lore, it could be really interesting. And about this, like, imagine if their update comes and one day something that was in the background, like nobody really cared about that specific lore because it was small and silent, but suddenly that becomes the main contender for the future. And we just look behind, like, look at that, we didn't even pay attention to this one. Apparently that's the true one.
So the very simple concept here is that over 10,000 years the Emperor has been steadily becoming empowered through the sacrifices and worship made to him. So much so that with the birth of the Psychic Awakening and all of that extra faith that's been coming forward, he has finally begun to emerge in the warp, or at least that is how it appears to be. Now this differs from the followers of the Star Child cult and the believers in some other ideologies who think that the Emperor needs to be reborn through actions or directly into a physical mortal shell, or by some other process. The Star Child cult believe that the Emperor's rebirth would be very much an instantaneous thing, where his body on the Golden Throne dies, and at that moment somehow their sacrifices would empower him as he's reborn anew in the warp. My personal speculation is that this is not entirely correct. We can't be 100% sure even if that's what they believe, because I believe that what is happening has the potential to be more troubling, and it raises more disturbing questions as you go along. From here on, we have to presume also that the Emperor is slowly coalescing into some new form in the warp as a Star Child, new man, whatever you want to call it. But essentially you have to assume that's what's happening, because otherwise the rest of today doesn't really make sense. Also, as I noted, these descriptions of the golden infant, some throne of light, those come directly from fairly primary lore material released very recently. So it has legitimacy. It's not some random theory from 20 years ago that can be just pushed aside. These are descriptions that are happening right now. Several questions come to mind though at this juncture. The question of, did the Emperor plan this from the outset? Did he intend to become a figure of worship, knowing that he would be interred on the throne, knowing that he would be steadily fueled by psychers, knowing that he would emerge 10,000 years later at the most critical time for humanity? Essentially, are the Amalathian Inquisitors correct? is this all part of the Emperor's grand plan, and that things are unfolding exactly as they should? I honestly think it's at least possible.
Okay, the Amalathians, whatever they call it, right? That is a very disturbing thing if that comes to true, right? Because first of all, it becomes less fun if the Emperor is all-knowing. Like, what are we supposed to take from there on, right? Like, everything's happening because Emperor, wanted it that way or molded it that way or just knew it. And even if Emperor is all-knowing, why do this Amalathian believe that he controls literally everything? So anything we do or any decision we make, Emperor already saw it. But why do you think he approved? Why do you think he controls everything, even if he's all-knowing? So this validation that they go through, like, okay, whatever we are doing because Emperor wanted it that way. I mean, you are implying that Emperor is all-knowing God from the start. So you wouldn't be in the shit you are right now. Chaos gods wouldn't exist in a way if Emperor controlled everything in the first place. Just because he's all-knowing doesn't mean he controls everything.
If not very plausible. When we consider the many references from the Emperor, he can often appear quite, depending on who he's speaking with, more enlightened or not. And then you have the shifting views of those who have known him in life outside of being the Emperor. Layered onto that, you have his questionable actions at the inception of the Imperium, the brutal slaughter of humans who might stand against him during unification, the execution of the Thunder Warriors, the cold indifference to his Primarchs, the willful disregard for the genetic integrity of the Astartes during the Crusade, and on and on. And then, of course, there's other factors.
Imagine those people, right, who used to walk around when he was alive. The God Emperor, the all-knowing, the Almighty, the true God. Who, Timmy? We used to get beer every time we came back from certain battle. Yeah, he wore golden armor and shit, whatever. He was the Emperor. Yeah, we used to drink. We used to check out some girls here and there. He was the all-knowing guy. We knew him as Timmy.
Factors like Malkador, the conversations we've learned in stories such as The Board is Set, the First Lord of the Imperium. Malkador saying the Emperor wasn't the Emperor until he met me, and all the conversations we've had about Malkador. Now, I'm not going to rake over all of those specifically today because we've done that. I think the point I want to make is that simply...
But it was like, Emperor ain't shit without me.
Unclear what the Emperor's intentions were. It remains very subjective. Everybody will interpret and feel differently about this. It's not bias, it's just you can't know yet. I still think that the pure salvation for humanity may not be the whole picture here. The emergence of the Star Child and what it could mean certainly, though, raises the prospect that the Emperor in fact knew exactly what he was doing, and that perhaps he may very well have intended to be interred on the throne all along, that he wanted to become a figure of worship, and that the heresy was all part of the plan.
Alright, I have to pause here, but seriously, that part, like I said, if he wanted to become this kind of almighty entity, who wanted to get power, become a god from warp, maybe heresy makes sense. This way chaos gods back off because he's a carcass on a throne. Humanity kind of, do fine by them. Everything kind of slows down in a way, right? Compared to the heresy, and he just slowly gains power, materializes in a war, become a god before he comes back as a star child or whatever, right? I mean, sure, that could be one of the mentality. But what makes me, really think about this is that, one of the theories how it says like Emperor is really old, and he could be one of the old ones or something, right? Khatans or whatever, one of the old gods. He could be one of them, right? So if that's the case, why do we assume that he gives a shit about humanity to begin with, if he's not even human to begin with, if he's one of those? What if humanity is a means to an end? What if his goal is to just dominate chaos gods and dominate the universe, even if it means he has to sacrifice all of humanity? So maybe Emperor coming back, if that's the case, would not be too good for humanity, because he would be a human emperor, right? He would do things with humanity, but what if his plan, his goal is not necessarily so good for humanity in the end, right? if that lore turns out to be true in the end, like humanity gets fucked by the Emperor himself because he wanted to dominate the world because he wasn't a human to begin with, that'd be some weird shit, man. Alright, well, I'll do the second part tomorrow, I guess. This is interesting. I like speculative things. I don't know why. This is why I'm going to love this, finishing this video. I'm going to do the second one tomorrow, I guess. Try to do a bigger one than this. This is just half an hour. I'll try to do an hour plus tomorrow or something. But yeah, I guess I'll see you next time.